Well, it's great to get a few minutes with Hrishikesh, who is a trading risk associate at Genesis. Hrishikesh, thank you for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks, Viraj. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your background. Can you share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm currently, as you mentioned, working as trading risk associate at Genesis, and I recently completed my financial engineering from Columbia University. So I was a 2020 graduate. And before this, I worked for around 3 years at Credit Suisse in India, where I was working as a quant analyst on one of the trading desks. And my undergrad is from BITS plan. So it was a dual degree program in economics and electrical electronics engineering.
Awesome. So when you came to the US, when did you start searching for full-time job opportunities as an international student?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question because the timing really matters when you are looking at opportunities. So let's say I like to break this into two parts. The first part is securing an internship because it is usually a good path to convert it to a full-time opportunities.
Got
And
it.
the next portion of it is basically directly applying for full-time jobs. So as far as the internship segment goes, one should ideally start as soon as they come to the university or as soon as they join it,
Mhm.
because there are two things. The first thing is, now one should be on top of LinkedIn, all the recruiters those are posting their jobs, and also students need to be in touch with their recruitment officers. So each university would have like a career sense cell which would tell students about opportunities and get in touch with them. So timing is really critical, and it's not like one should just start applying and ignoring their studies and everything. There is a time for that. So for example, summer internships in finance would usually start for picking students or taking interviews somewhere around September in
Mhm.
the a year before that. So one should try to focus on study good, get gain the right skill set till that time, and as soon as there are openings, then one should basically be prepared for interviews.
Got it, got it. And now, if you were to look back, would you have changed your approach? Or I guess, would you have changed the timing of beginning your job search?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the first mistake that I made and anyone with no experience would make is getting slightly anxious. And as soon as you see the first employer coming in the gate, you would be like, oh, what if I get selected right now? Then maybe I can focus on studies, or maybe I won't have to worry about it in later phase. But that's usually not how it works. So we have to be slightly patient and a little bit practical in terms of understanding the competition that we have in international universities. So I think the focus should be, once you know the time the period has started, like companies are in and they are recruiting students, just try to do as much good as you can. And one should understand it's always a learning curve. So it's not like companies will be there for 1 month and then they just won't go. It is also possible that for a summer internship, one might get a job in March, April of that summer as well, right?
Hmm.
It is always the case. So I think the right idea is for me was to learn from each experience. Like I appeared for interviews in September, October, November, December, all months, and I could see the improvement. So I knew the kind of questions they would ask. I knew the kind of answers that I should give. You would always receive feedback from your interviewers. So in that way, I think really gaining that interviewing skill or exam taking skill is something that one need to build up over time, and being patient and having confidence in your skills, I think, is the key.
Got it. How did you approach your job search?
Yeah, I think again a good question. So for job search, there are again two things in my opinion. First thing is people who come with some work experience, like myself. Like I was working for 3 years, so we have a slight edge in terms of preparing resume and trying to portray our work that we have done. That basically we already have worked in this setup, and hence we can easily fit in any place in a similar function.
Mhm.
Or the next phase is what you want to do. So for many students, the idea to pursue masters or any higher education is usually to change the stream. Like if they don't like the existing role or function that they are working in, even within the same subject, I would say they would like to change it. So that is the key. So what exactly are you focusing on? So in that way, I would say having some work experience is extremely beneficial. Like if you have a work experience from India, from a reputed company, or in general, not a reputed company, but if you have done some good work which is not very common in any space, then certainly you can portray it on your resume, and it certainly has got a very good potential. So for the people who would just like to continue in the same segment they have been working and just get a slightly better job or maybe a job here, they would get ample of opportunity in my opinion
Mm-hmm.
regarding interviews, because it is certainly valued. Experience has a value, and for those people, in those cases where someone is straight coming out of college undergrad in India and directly doing masters, then they have the advantage is they kind of have an open ground in terms of they do not have they do not belong to a particular role, or they do not have something to talk about, right? So they can just talk about what they want to do, and
Yes.
if they are curious enough, passionate enough about what they want to do, then certainly it is valued. Just that it is a very clear cut distinction, as they say, between the experienced hires and a graduate hire. So a graduate hire is someone who has just finished studies and want to enter the corporate world,
Mm-hmm.
as compared to an experienced hire who maybe has done masters now but already has some experience.
Got it.
So that way, I think taking a right judgment about what you want to do is really important.
Okay, so you were basically an experienced hire because you had
Yeah,
that 3 years of work experience. So for
exactly.
you, the way you approach your job search was you were trying to build your resume or profile around that experience, work experience that you had, and
Yes.
you were showing that to the employers in the US that, hey, I did this for 3 years
Hmm.
and this is my master's program and this is where I can easily fit in because I have the past work experience.
Hmm.
In regards to maybe not the resources but like the ways of applying for jobs, was there any particular portal that you were using like LinkedIn, or like your universities had some resources, or was it just like an
Hmm.
online search? Like how were you applying for jobs?
Yeah. So there were a couple of mediums to reach job opportunities. The first and foremost was the career sales website. So Columbia had a career page where all the employers would list their jobs,
Mm-hmm.
all the internships, full-time jobs, and we would just need to upload a resume. And it was a very quick, like less than 10 seconds time it would take. Just upload your resume, and it would reach employer directly. Then Columbia also has something called as a resume book. I think it would be a part of all major institutions in United States. So resume book has, as the name suggests, all the resumes of your batchmates along with you, and it is like a compilation of all the PDFs. So what it does is sometimes employers might just request Columbia that okay, we would like to hire someone. Can you send a resume book? So in that case, Columbia would directly send all the resumes, like a many PDF pages of all the resumes, and then employer would have a quick look and maybe call one or two candidates like this. So that is another way, but it is also rare. The most prominent way for me was to reach out through LinkedIn and to apply on company websites. But again, here one needs to be a little smart. I think that I made many mistakes. When you apply to any job, let us say on a company portal, one must assume that there are at least 1,000 students applying for the same job. So even if you think that your skills and your resume is relevant for the job, there is no guarantee as such that you would receive a call, because it is extremely general rule. Like the process, I think, goes like first HR will go through all the resumes. HR may not exactly relate, to what you want or why you are a good fit. And till the time actually a business person or a technical person who hires you, there is some lag. So that process is slightly random, in my opinion. The better way for me was to apply on LinkedIn jobs, and in LinkedIn, we all used to have premium account, so we get to see who is the recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
So in recruiter, sometimes it is HR, sometimes it can be a line manager as well, like directly the person who is hiring. So you can drop an email to that person. That is also one way. And the third way, which and something that I personally benefited a lot from, was to do some networking. So what I used to do is I used to personally network with everyone on LinkedIn.
Hmm.
So if I came up with some good opportunity, then I would like to connect with people in that form or in similar function, and try to talk to them about, like, hey, just a cold mail, like, hey, I just came across this opportunity, and never like, would you be interested in me, something like this, just general catch up, like,
Yes.
hey, I just came across opportunity, and this I saw, and I'm interested in similar kind of function down the line, and I am this background. So do you think what I should do, generally speaking, what I should do if I want to eventually end up in this kind of role?
Hmm.
So depending on the interest that you show, and depending on interesting profile that the recruiter or the employer feels about you, even on LinkedIn, people usually just tell like, okay, are you free, can you call tomorrow, like that easily people are ready to talk. So I think it is more about, finding that match.
Yeah.
And that is, I think that is the key, and one can easily do that a lot on LinkedIn, I think.
Awesome. Awesome. So now, if you were to look back, would you have changed something when it came to just the approach that you took for job search, or just the way, like the medium that you were using for job search? Would you have focused on something more? Would you have focused on something less?
Yeah, certainly. So one thing that I would change is, no, not really. Because one thing that I think invested a lot of time was applying on company websites.
Hmm.
And usually, many companies have these long forms. They're 7, 8 pages. It'll ask each and every detail about you. And in the end, it will ask, like, do you need sponsorship? And if you say yes, then you really don't know whether, if even if your application is being processed at that moment, because that is the really tricky question, right? So if they are not ready to sponsor, but they won't tell you in advance. So they'll
Yes.
ask you to fill all the 10 pages, and after that they'll tell you, okay, if you want sponsorship, then basically you won't hear anything. So that is kind of sad. So yeah, agreed. If I have to change something, then I would slightly focus more on networking on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
applying jobs on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
and even if yeah, so even if I see a job opening, then rather than directly applying on company website, what I would do now is, first I would like to talk to someone on
Yes.
LinkedIn or through a friend, and then understand if they are going, there is a sponsorship, or if my skills are good enough, or it is something that they would be interested in.
Yeah.
And after that, because there have been cases with really good employers where I first communicated or networked through LinkedIn, and then later, after few chats, the person told me that, okay, just for the formality, can you please also apply through our website?
Yeah.
So that can always happen, right? So yeah,
Awesome.
I think, yeah, if I have to change something, I would first try to talk to people. Yeah.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about actually getting interviews for the roles that you applied for through different mediums.
Hmm.
What did you do to get the interviews from the companies that you applied for? Was there anything specific that you were doing?
Hmm. Yeah, certainly. So here, I think the Mm, most important thing that played a huge role was again my experience. So I had a kind of relevant experience. Not kind of, I had a relevant experience with respect to the quantitative field that we all were looking jobs in. So I was working as a quantitative analyst on a trading desk, and I was basically trying to work with strategies on index trading business. So it was an important role, and it was something that this is the kind of skill set that not many in my batchmate, or not many people coming to US would have. So it was a very specific, I think, the kind of exposure that I had got, which was relevant to some of the roles. So when it came to getting interviews, I would directly bounce upon, like, hey, I was working in this role, and I have worked with these asset classes, and I have used to run a book of like this much dollar notional, and we used to generate these many millions in dollar notional. So it creates an kind of impact that, okay, this person has been from a trading background, and this person knows what he is talking about.
Got it.
So it directly comes to the point where they would ask you, okay, because finance is not a very big world in my opinion, it's a small world. So it directly comes to a point, so okay, who you working with? And if you say a name that okay, I was working with this counterpart in London or New York, then they would say, oh yeah, I know him or I know her.
Oh, wow.
So the connection comes that easily. So once all that happens, then I think interviews is pretty much just checking your skills and knowledge.
Oh, wow. That's phenomenal. So the way you were getting interviews was again relying on your past experience and saying that, hey, I have experience in this particular space, and the
Hmm.
person will ask you, okay, who did you work with? And
Hmm.
because it's a small industry, finance is a small industry, when you mention the person's name, usually
Yeah,
folks in the finance world
yeah.
can
So
relate to that,
exactly.
and then you got your
So
interviews through that.
yeah, certainly. But again, this worked because my role was niche. So I used
Yes.
to work for a specific trading desk, and
Yes.
hence I used to apply and try to connect with people related to that trading desk. And it always happens like when a person becomes senior, that person over the period gathers that limited skill set, but the person becomes expert in generating revenue in that space. So over the period, they just maybe switch firms or do slide here and there, but more or less they know the community. They are talking to different traders from other banks on a daily basis. So
Absolutely.
they kind of know each other. So it was helpful that way.
Got it. Now, looking back, would you have done something different? Would you have changed your approach when it came to getting interviews?
Yeah, certainly. So I think one thing that I would change is I was banking a lot on my experience, and also I was getting good responses. So I was getting many interviews based on my experience. But end of the day, I was not very sure if I want a job in the same function or a similar function,
Hmm.
or after gaining knowledge of financial engineering, or maybe I want to have a different kind of role. So now, if I have looking back, if I have to change something, then certainly I would have two types of target people I would like to network with. One would be like based on my experience, which I did, but I would also like to focus on those people who are in the role that eventually is more attractive to me. Maybe
Yes.
after education here, right? So in that case, I like to portray myself as a more general candidate with some exposure in one segment,
Hmm.
but yeah, keeping myself open to options. So that one thing I would certainly change.
How did you prepare for the interviews that you got?
Yeah, again, a great question. So in finance, especially in quantitative finance field, there are some standard books. Those one should prepare and one should know in out, because there are two types of questions. Yeah, I think interviews are not very difficult to prepare that way, because there are two types of questions. One type of questions are usually the standard questions. So the list is very large, but one needs to basically put efforts in that. So one need to have very good understanding of mathematical concepts like probability, stochastic calculus, all these subject matters which any quantitative finance student should know. So there are famous books for that, which are used across the street, and one must know, I think, almost all questions or all the concepts in those books. So apart from that, then there are certain puzzles, and there are certain algorithm questions, data structure questions.
Hmm.
Those would be asked in a very specific role, like an algorithmic trading role or strategies role.
Hmm.
So for that, the person would basically get an interview if that person already has some exposure, because it is extremely competitive in first place. And if one is getting an interview, then one should have understanding of data structures and basic algorithms. It is expected. So yeah, those that is I would still say that is on slightly the harder part. But another set of questions that one should know absolutely one should ace it are the resume based questions. So if you have any work experience or if you have worked on any project, then it is uh, always I would say tempting to flash yourself as someone who is very good because you want to get your resume picked in the first place. I completely agree with that. But at the same time, in the back end or in the background, one should always know in and out about what they are writing. So there have been many cases where I mentioned a project and I got questions, those even I had not thought before related to that project. And it was not like I was flashing something. It was something I had actually done,
Hmm.
just that my thought process never went into that region itself. So getting a very broad understanding of interviews is extremely helpful. Plus, for interview preparation, I think one good thing that people can do is have mock interviews. So,
Hmm.
for example, our university had online mock interviews session where we could arrange slots for ourselves, and then basically someone from administrative staff would take an interview, or in friends we used to do sometimes. So we used to prepare resumes, and you can ask a bunch of friends that, okay, can you try to drill me or try to
Yes.
ask as many counter questions as possible on this case.
Yeah.
So based on that, uh, one needs to be very thorough with resume based questions. And
Got it.
yeah, as far as the technical questions goes, one needs to be very strong in terms of preparation.
Got it. Looking back, what would you have done differently when it came to preparing for interviews?
Yeah, certainly. I think what I would have done differently is prepare. As they say,
Okay.
I would have prepared more,
Got
because
it.
when you get interviews, there are multiple things. So you also have to think about the critical aspects, right? Like timing. So you get interviews. It's not like you only have interview. You have to have studies. You have exams. You have interview today. You have interview tomorrow,
Yes.
and you think tomorrow's interview is more important. So all those things are playing in your mind, right? So treating each interview with some objective is something that I would change. Like, what is my objective?
Hmm.
It is possible my objective from this interview is not to get selected. It's okay, that's fine. But my objective is to basically get as much feedback about myself, which would be eventually helpful to me, right?
Yes.
So, what one wants to extract, and having a more clear thought process around that is something that I would really change. Like in some of the interviews, because I feel in interviews you can always choose the direction you want to get interviewed to.
Yeah.
Like, unless and until it is hardcore technical interview where you get like a set of four technical questions. If
Hmm.
it's like a general discussion kind of interview, then you can always interviewer would usually like to talk about what you have already talked about, right? So given chance, looking back, what I would change is I would like define the streams I would like to talk about in various interviews, and maybe get feedback, and then decide like which type of stream I am better suited for, or I can easily talk about. So like trying to win methodically.
Got it. Let's pivot towards some company specific questions.
Hmm.
How did you come across your specific role of trading risk associate at Genesis?
Yeah, so this role I came across on LinkedIn,
Okay.
and at that time I was really looking for a job, to be honest. So what I was doing is I was looking into almost all trading related roles, because I thought I had an edge in that way, because not many of my batchmates, friends, or in general people who were looking out for jobs at that time had a good trading experience. So I just applied for this job because it mentioned they required like a trading risk associate, and I was also attracted to the new asset class. Like, so Genesis is a market maker company in crypto. So I was attracted to the new asset class. It's emerging, and I want to like be the early mover in this space.
Got it.
And I have been following this crypto space for some time also. So I thought that maybe I'll give it a try. And I was never 100% sure, because I myself have never worked in any crypto related space before. So I was not very sure about the intricacies about it, but certainly I knew like as the space is developing, we all are learning on the way. So yeah, I just went through the process. I had many interviews, and yeah,
Got
that's
it.
how it.
How did you actually get the interview for this role? I know you mentioned that you came across this position on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
What did you do to get the interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. So as soon as I think I applied on this role, I
Hmm.
also dropped an email to the recruiter,
Got it.
and I think the recruiter was HR. So that HR then replied to my message that like kind of okay, we are looking into it. And then after 2 weeks or so, I formally received her email for arranging and call. So that's how it started. And after that, it was like one by one interviews.
Got it. So that kind of brings us to the next question. What was the interview process like, beginning from the first interview round till the end?
Mhm. Yeah, sure. So the first interview was with HR just to get to know me and try to understand why I'm interested in this role and certain basics like I'm an international student and the kind of questions that you would usually get be asked. And from that point, she felt that okay, I could be a good fit. I was moved to the next round. So my next round was with my line manager, or who is basically now my manager. So the most important person in hiring decision, I think. So that interview went well. So he really grilled me a lot in terms of why I want to be in that particular role, or
Mm-hmm.
why I think my background is a good fit, or my education brings me to that place. So or why should I get that seat? So that interview went well. I was not very sure because it was slightly on that side. I felt that I could not talk a lot about the new space, but again, one should know that even if like in interview you don't know everything about what employer want is doing, if you know good enough about what you are doing, it also can create a decent enough impression. So it was not great interview, but okay. And after that, I talked with the two of the chief operating officer. Then I had interviews with multiple traders, and overall, I think I went through somewhere around six interview rounds. And after that, finally, they decided to go with me.
Got it. And how long after your last interview round did you get the offer?
Uh, I think it was somewhere less than a week or so. So what had happened, if I remember correctly, yeah. So I knew all my rounds were done. So in the last round, they told me like, okay, now all the interview process is completed, and we will let you know about the decision in few days. So and yeah, in the next week or so, I received a call first, basically from my line manager.
Mhm.
So he called me as soon as he had the approval, I think, or the processing done in the background. He immediately called me and told me on the phone that okay, congratulations, we are going to offer you, and you would receive the return offer soon and so on. So yeah, that's how I came to.
Got it. Any last piece of advice for any international student who might be listening to this and who is seeking a full time opportunity in the US?
Yeah, I think one piece of advice that I have personally benefited from, and everyone should know, is it is very important to know the progress that you are doing on your own and concentrating on that, because it is very easy to observe the competition or to get depressed or kind of anxious that okay, this is happening around me, what am I doing, what am I not doing.
Mhm.
The Because it is not easy. I think the most of the students that would agree with me here, coming here or getting a job. Getting a job is certainly not easy, and getting a good job is extremely tough. So what is important is improving yourself and trusting yourself that okay, you are improving. So for that, the simple trick that one can do is okay, yesterday I was at 1, today I am at 1.1. Maybe it can be any skill. So that delta doesn't need to be extremely high, because we all have different starting points, we all are unique in a different way.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that having that mindset that okay, I am progressing and it is good and good things will happen. So having that slight optimistic touch,
Mhm.
even if you don't see it right away, is important, because situations change, things change, and when it but and with competition and everything, it is really easy. Like for example, in my batch, there were so many people who are like extremely smart. So if I would not have this mindset, then it would be like, okay, how will I get into a good role or something like this. It is very easy to basically have negative feelings about it. So having that mentality of, okay, progressing even if by small delta every day, I think that is extremely critical to improve in any segment in life, I think.
Amazing. Rishikesh, really appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing the insights.